He lost everything, his wife, his fortune, even himself, but what he found changed everything. Today I will tell you a story about the life of a 75-year-old man. Frank Morgan lives alone in a weathered wooden cabin tucked deep in the forests of Montana. To most people, he's just the quiet old man who reads Stoic philosophy, tends his garden, and never seems to complain about anything. But that's not the man he always was. There was a time when Frank burned with anger, chased success like a storm, drank himself into silence, and destroyed everything he once built. He lost his wife, his wealth, and his will to keep going. Then, at 44, in a dusty second-hand bookstore in Texas, he found a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. That moment didn't solve his problems, it gave him better questions. Today, after more than 30 years of walking the Stoic path, Frank doesn't teach from theory, he teaches from scars. And he's offering 8 life lessons that didn't just save him, but could save you too. Because the Stoics didn't promise ease, they promised strength. And Frank Morgan is living proof. Lesson 1. Silence is the confidence of the self-controlled. Frank Morgan used to believe that the loudest voice was the one that won. In his younger days, he never backed down from a fight, verbal or otherwise. In the military, he once challenged a commanding officer mid-mission because he thought he was right. In his marriage, he argued not to resolve conflict, but to prove he was smarter, stronger, more in control. But the more Frank spoke, the more he lost. He lost trust, he lost respect. Eventually, he lost his job, fired not for incompetence, but for refusing to let go of an argument with a business partner. That day, alone in his car, he flipped open Meditations and landed on one line from Marcus Aurelius that hit like a blade. You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. That was the moment it began to change. Frank didn't become quiet overnight, but he started journaling every night, writing down every thought he used to throw at others. He stopped needing to be right. He stopped responding to every provocation. And most importantly, he learned that real strength never shouts. Silence, he would say later, is not surrender, it's self-mastery. The man who once spoke to be heard now speaks only when it adds value. He listens more than he talks. And when people push, accuse, or misunderstand, he simply smiles. Not from arrogance, but from peace. Frank came to believe that silence is not a weakness, it's the shield of the Stoic, a tool that separates reaction from response, a space where reason gets to speak before the ego does. And if you ask him now what he thinks of being misunderstood, he'll shrug and say, that's their burden to carry, not mine. Lesson 2. Discipline saved his life more than once. Frank Morgan didn't drink to celebrate, he drank to forget. After leaving the military, he lost his sense of mission. Civilian life felt slow, meaningless, and too quiet for a man who had lived through noise and chaos. At first, a drink helped him sleep. Then it helped him feel nothing, and before long, it helped him lose everything. He lost his wife. He lost his children. And eventually he lost the ability to look in the mirror without feeling disgust. One night, at 41 years old, Frank crashed his truck into a ditch, alone, drunk, bleeding. He doesn't remember the impact, only the sterile lights of the hospital and the cold silence of waking up alone. That morning, with trembling hands, he opened his journal and wrote 3 words: discipline or death. It wasn't poetic, it was a decision. From that day forward, Frank began rebuilding minute by minute. He started waking up at 5 a.m., even when sleep didn't come. He meditated for 10 minutes, even when his mind screamed. He walked for 30 minutes, even when his legs were weak. He wrote in his journal every day and read Marcus Aurelius before the sun rose. He didn't do it for motivation. He did it because the alternative was dying. Frank says discipline didn't imprison him, it freed him. It gave him a way out of the storm inside his head. It wasn't a punishment, it was the scaffolding for a new life. To anyone younger who thinks freedom is the ability to do whatever you want, he has this to say. Freedom is being able to choose what's right, even when everything inside you wants to quit. He doesn't share this to impress anyone. He knows many won't listen until life forces them to. But if you're there now, at the edge, wondering if it's too late, it's not. You don't need a perfect plan, just a starting line, and the courage to show up for yourself one disciplined act at a time. Because the truth is simple, Frank says, as he closes his journal each morning. Discipline didn't save my career. It saved my soul. Lesson 3. Life isn't fair, and that's okay. Frank Morgan used to believe in fairness. That if you worked hard, stayed loyal, did the right thing, life would reward you. But life had other plans. At 48, Frank was betrayed by someone he called his best friend. A business deal they built for years was stripped away overnight, contracts rewritten, accounts emptied, lawyers called. In the end, Frank wasn't just broke, he was humiliated. And what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the disbelief. How could he do this to me? Frank spent weeks drowning in anger, spiraling into bitterness, until one night he picked up discourses by Epictetus and paused on a line that read, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." He closed the book. And then he whispered to himself, "So what now?" That question changed everything. Frank didn't sue, didn't beg, didn't curse the heavens. He took a walk, a long one. Then he made a list, not of what he'd lost, but of what he still had. His health, his mind, his dignity, and time. That's when he realized, life doesn't owe you fairness. It only offers you moments, and what you do with them is yours alone. So Frank got back to work, quietly, slowly, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. He never made that kind of money again, but he made peace, and in the end, that was more valuable. To the younger generation, he says this: if you expect life to be fair, you'll live disappointed. But if you learn to accept what is and choose who you'll be in response, you'll become unshakable. Now, when life hits hard, Frank doesn't ask, "Why me?" He asks, "What can this teach me?" And he believes that's the most stoic question a person can ever learn to ask. Because, as he puts it, leaning back in his wooden chair, watching the wind move through the trees, life doesn't break you, it reveals you. Fair or not, that's the only truth that matters. Lesson 4. Solitude is where the soul comes home. Frank Morgan didn't choose solitude at first, it chose him. After the divorce, after the business fell apart, after the friends stopped calling, he found himself alone, truly alone. No noise, no plans, no one waiting on the other end of a phone. At first, it felt like punishment. Silence can be deafening when you've spent your life distracting yourself. The first winter in his cabin was the hardest. Snow pressing against the windows, nights stretching too long, no one to talk to, no one to blame, just him and the thoughts he'd avoided for decades. But something happened around month 3. The silence stopped sounding like emptiness. It started sounding like truth. Without the need to perform or explain himself, Frank began to meet someone he hadn't truly known in years himself. And instead of running, he stayed. He journaled, he read, he walked without headphones. He made peace with his memories. He forgave people who would never say sorry. Most importantly, he forgave himself. That's when solitude stopped being loneliness. and started becoming sanctuary. He understood what Seneca meant when he wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Because in silence, Frank realized, he wasn't broken. He was just buried under noise, ego, expectations. And solitude was the shovel. To young people terrified of being alone, Frank doesn't give advice. He gives reassurance. You're not lost. You're just unaccompanied. And that's not always a bad thing. Because sometimes you need to sit quietly long enough to hear what your soul's been trying to say. Frank still lives alone, but now it's not exile, it's a return. Each morning, he lights a small fire, brews black coffee, and writes just a few lines to himself for no one else to read. He watches the sun touch the trees. No rush, no need to prove. And when people ask, "Don't you get lonely?" he smiles, slow and sure, and answers, "I did. Until I realized the only company I was missing was me." Lesson 5. Health is the true Stoic wealth. Frank Morgan didn't care much for his body in his younger years. He treated it like a tool, something to be pushed, punished, and numbed. During his time in the Marines, pain was a badge of honor. Later, in his business years, sleep was a weakness. And in the darkest chapters, his body became a container for everything he was trying not to feel. Then, one morning, at 59, he collapsed on the kitchen floor. No warning, just the sound of a teacup breaking and the feeling of life slipping out of his chest. It was a minor heart attack, but it changed everything. Lying in that hospital bed, Frank realized something simple, something brutal. You can't practice Stoicism if you're not alive. From that day forward, he treated health not as a goal but as a foundation. He started walking every morning before the sun came up. He ate simply whole food, little sugar, no alcohol. He meditated not just for the mind, but for his heart rate. He went to sleep early. He learned to breathe deeply. He cut out everything that numbed or overstimulated. Not to live longer, to live clearer. Frank came to believe what many ignore until it's too late. Your body isn't your servant, it's your ally. And if you don't listen when it whispers, it will scream. There was no obsession, no strict rules, just devotion to balance. He read Epictetus under the morning sun, with his hands warmed by a cup of tea, grateful that his hands could still hold it. To the younger generation, chasing success on 4 hours of sleep and fast food, Frank doesn't preach. He just says this: "I used to trade my health for ambition. Now I protect it like it's gold. Because when your body breaks, your mind can't carry you." And when people ask him the secret to his clarity, his calm, his strength, he doesn't point to a quote. He points to his plate, his walking shoes, his breath. And quietly, as if revealing something sacred, he says, "Stillness begins in the body. Protect it. You only get one." Lesson 6. Not every battle is worth your peace. Frank Morgan has always had a sharp tongue and a quicker temper. He used to believe that silence was weakness, that letting something slide meant losing ground. So he spoke up, always, loudly. He defended his ideas, his pride, his ego sometimes at the cost of relationships that truly mattered. He once lost a 20-year friendship over a single argument. A disagreement about money, made worse by pride and poisoned by stubbornness. They both walked away that night, too proud to apologize. The friend passed away 2 years later. They never spoke again. That memory still lives in Frank's quiet moments, and it changed him more than any Stoic quote ever could. Later, when rereading Meditations, he paused at a line that now held weight. "You always own the option of having no opinion." Marcus Aurelius. It hit him. He didn't need to engage in every fight. He didn't need to be right, especially when being right cost him peace. So Frank made a new rule. If it doesn't threaten your values, your safety, or your loved ones, let it pass. He began practicing what he called intentional silence. He didn't argue to prove a point. He let people be wrong. He learned to say, "You might be right," and mean it. Most arguments, he says, aren't about truth. They're about ego wearing a mask. To young people today, raised on outrage and reaction, Frank offers no lecture, just a question. What if the real power is walking away with your peace intact? Now, when someone tries to provoke him, Frank doesn't rise. He listens, he nods, he smiles, because he knows. Winning the argument might feed your pride, but preserving your peace, that feeds your soul. And when asked if he regrets not speaking up more, he replies, "I regret every time I let pride speak louder than love." Lesson 7. Time is the currency you can't earn back. Frank Morgan didn't always value time. Like most men in their prime, he thought it was endless, something to be spent recklessly, traded for money, distractions, or the approval of people who never stayed. He gave years to building businesses he didn't believe in. He missed birthdays, skipped dinners, postponed apologies. He assumed there'd always be more time, until there wasn't. His younger brother, Daniel, died suddenly of a stroke at 49. One moment, they were planning a fishing trip. The next, Frank was standing alone beside a casket carrying not flowers, but unfinished conversations. That day, something cracked. It wasn't grief, it was awakening. For the first time, Frank stopped asking, "What should I do next?" and started asking, "How much time will it cost me, and is it worth it?" He no longer chased more, he cherished enough. No more busy work, no more shallow yeses. He guarded his mornings, protected his evenings, and began treating time like gold, non-refundable, non-negotiable. He understood what Seneca meant when he wrote, "People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy." Now, Frank wakes before sunrise, walks in silence, drinks his coffee slowly. He watches the wind move through trees like it's the first time. He doesn't rush, not because he has all the time, but because he knows he doesn't. To the younger generation burning out by 30, chasing deadlines and dopamine, Frank says, "You can make back the money, you can rebuild your body, but time doesn't wait, and one day you'll beg for 5 more minutes with someone you love." So ask yourself not just how you spend your time, but who you spend it with, what you trade it for, and whether, years from now, you'll wish you'd spent it differently. Frank doesn't count days anymore. He counts presents. And as he often writes in his journal, just beneath the date, "Time is not something you fill, it's something you honor." Lesson 8. The best things in life take time. Frank Morgan used to be in a hurry. He rushed into careers, relationships, decisions, thinking that speed was strength and movement meant progress. If something didn't come fast, he assumed it wasn't meant to be. If someone didn't respond quickly, he moved on. Patience felt like weakness. Slowness felt like failure. Stillness felt like death. But somewhere between loss and loneliness, between reading Marcus and watching the seasons shift outside his window, Frank learned a lesson that hit deeper than all the rest. Everything worth having, peace, wisdom, love, strength, moves slowly. He didn't learn that from a book. He learned it watching a tree grow. The old pine outside his cabin took 30 years to rise above the others. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the prettiest, but it stood tall when storms came, because its roots ran deep. Frank began to live the same way. He stopped rushing healing. He stopped forcing answers. He stopped demanding timelines from life that only unfold when you're truly ready. Instead, he practiced what the Stoics called amor fati, a love of fate, including its delays. He learned to trust the slow burn, to embrace the work that doesn't show results right away, to stay with something even when it's quiet, because growth often happens in silence. To the young, impatient hearts out there chasing love, purpose, success, Frank offers no shortcuts, just a truth. If it comes quickly, it might leave just as fast. But what's built with patience tends to last. Now, when life feels slow, Frank doesn't panic. He listens. He waits. He waters what he can. And when asked how long it took to build the life he lives today, he doesn't give a number. He just smiles and says, "Long enough to do it right." Because he knows. Fast feeds the ego, but slow feeds the soul. Conclusion. What Frank left behind? Frank didn't leave behind wealth. There's no treasure in his cabin, only a shelf heavy with old Stoic books and notebooks filled with reflections written in the quiet hours of the morning. "If I could go back to age 25, he once said, I wouldn't bring a watch. I'd bring meditations. A watch tells you the time. Marcus Aurelius tells you who you are." He never wanted admiration. Only this, that one young person, somewhere in the world, might hear his story and realize. You don't have to wait until you're 70 to start living awake. If Frank's story spoke to you, take a moment, like the video, subscribe if you want more wisdom like this. But more importantly, start your own Stoic journey. Drop a comment below. I choose the Stoic path. Make it your quiet promise to yourself, because it's never too late, but it's also never too early.